Have you ever noticed that the moment you decide to stop fearing pain is precisely when your life begins to change? Not when pain stops coming, because it never does, but when you stop running from it. What if I told you that the greatest minds in history discovered something remarkable about pain? That the way we've been taught to avoid it is exactly what makes it unbearable. Carl Jung once whispered a truth so dangerous it's been hidden in plain sight. Nothing and nobody will ever hurt you again. Not because the world suddenly becomes gentle, but because you've discovered the secret passage through suffering that most will never find. In the winter of 1913, Carl Jung experienced what many would call a psychotic break, but he called it something else, a confrontation with the unconscious. For 3 years, he descended into a personal hell, bombarded by visions and voices that threatened to tear his mind apart. His wife thought he was losing his sanity. His colleagues whispered that his brilliant career was over. Even Jung himself wondered if he would ever emerge from this darkness. But instead of running from these demons, he did something that defied all conventional wisdom. He invited them in. He spoke with them. He sketched their faces in his famous red book. He asked them questions. And in doing so, he discovered something that would transform psychology forever. The wound is where the light enters. This isn't just Jung's story. It's the hidden pattern behind every human life that has ever truly awakened. The journey. The first truth: pain is information, not punishment. Imagine you're walking barefoot through a forest. Suddenly, a sharp thorn pierces your heel. The pain shoots up your leg like lightning. What's your first instinct? To pull away, of course. To curse the thorn, maybe curse the forest itself. To see the pain as an enemy, something that should not be happening. But what if pain is actually a messenger, not an intruder? When 4-year-old Maya touched a hot stove for the first time, she screamed in agony. Her mother rushed to comfort her, but something curious happened in Maya's developing brain. New neural pathways formed instantly, teaching her something vital about her world. The pain wasn't punishing her, it was educating her about boundaries that keep her alive. The same principle applies to our emotional wounds. When Thomas discovered his partner's betrayal after 7 years together, the pain felt unsurvivable. He couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. His friends worried as he lost 20 pounds in a month. But in his darkest moment, something shifted. He began to ask, "What is this pain trying to tell me?" The answer wasn't what he expected. The pain wasn't saying, "You were wronged," or "Love is dangerous." It was revealing how he had betrayed himself long before his partner did, by ignoring his intuition, by compromising his boundaries, by choosing security over truth. Jung discovered this principle through his own suffering. He wrote, "The acceptance of oneself is the essence of the whole moral problem and the epitome of a whole outlook on life." This isn't some abstract philosophical idea. It's a practical truth about human experience. Pain isn't random cruelty inflicted by an uncaring universe. It's feedback. It's the universe speaking to you in the only language intense enough to get your attention. The second truth: the wound creates the healer. There's a phenomenon psychologists call post-traumatic growth. The discovery that some people don't just recover from trauma, they transform through it. But what separates those who grow from those who remain broken? Consider the story of Maya Angelou. Raped at age 8, she became mute for nearly 5 years. The wound was catastrophic. Yet from that very same wound emerged one of history's most powerful voices, a voice that would comfort and inspire millions. "You may encounter many defeats," she later wrote, "but you must not be defeated." This isn't toxic positivity or spiritual bypassing. It's a profound psychological truth that Jung understood better than anyone: the wounded healer archetype. Jung noticed something fascinating in his patients. Those who had suffered deeply and integrated their suffering had a remarkable capacity to help others heal. Their wounds became their credentials. Their scars became their wisdom. Think about the friend you call when your heart is broken. Is it the person whose life has been perfect? Or is it the one who has walked through fire and emerged with compassion rather than bitterness? When Sarah lost her child to cancer, she thought her life was over. For 2 years, she could barely function. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, something began to change. The pain didn't disappear. It transformed. It softened her sharp edges. It deepened her capacity to sit with others in their suffering without trying to fix them. 5 years later, she found herself running a support group for grieving parents. "I don't have answers," she would tell them, "but I know how to sit in the dark with you until dawn comes." This is what Jung meant when he wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Our wounds, when fully faced, reveal not just our vulnerability, but our extraordinary capacity for resilience. The third truth: what we resist persists. Have you ever noticed that the emotions you fight the hardest are precisely the ones that never seem to leave you? Jung observed this pattern repeatedly in his patients. The more they battled against their shadow, those disowned parts of themselves they couldn't bear to face, the more power those shadows gain. Consider Michael, a successful business executive who prided himself on never showing weakness. For 20 years, he pushed down every feeling of inadequacy, every trace of vulnerability. He built an empire on the foundation of appearing invincible. Then came the panic attacks, first in the middle of board meetings, then on his daughter's graduation day. Finally, while driving on the highway, so severe he had to pull over, certain he was dying. His body was staging a revolution against decades of emotional suppression. In therapy, he discovered what Jung had articulated years before. What you resist not only persists, but will grow in size. The very feelings he had spent a lifetime running from were now demanding to be heard. The breakthrough came not when Michael conquered his anxiety, but when he surrendered to it. When he finally sat with the trembling in his hands and the racing of his heart and said, "I see you. I feel you. You're allowed to be here." This is the counterintuitive truth about healing. Acceptance precedes change. Not passive resignation, but active, compassionate witnessing. When researchers at Harvard studied people with chronic pain, they discovered something remarkable. Those who practiced mindfulness, simply observing their pain without judgment, experienced significant reductions in their suffering compared to those who tried to control or eliminate it. The principle applies universally. The divorce you can't accept keeps haunting you. The grief you refuse to feel keeps emerging in unexpected places. The anger you deem unacceptable keeps finding indirect expressions. Jung put it simply, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. The fourth truth: there are no negative emotions, only negative relationships with emotions. What if I told you that anger isn't negative? Neither is fear, or jealousy, or even grief. These emotions only become destructive when we misunderstand their purpose or deny their existence. Consider anger. When channeled consciously, anger is the energy that fuels social movements, protects boundaries, and catalyzes necessary change. Martin Luther King Jr.'s righteous anger, controlled, focused, and directed toward injustice rather than individuals, changed the course of history. Yet most of us have been taught that anger is something to suppress, especially if we were raised as girls or in certain cultural contexts where emotional expression was discouraged. Jung understood that emotions are neither good nor bad. They are messengers carrying vital information about our internal state and external environment. Elena grew up in a household where anger was forbidden. Her father's rage was the only expression allowed, while her mother's silent suffering was the model she inherited. When she entered her first serious relationship, she became a pleaser, abandoning her needs, swallowing her truth, accommodating beyond reason, until her body began to speak through mysterious symptoms: chronic fatigue, unexplained pain, digestive issues that no doctor could diagnose. In therapy, she discovered decades of unexpressed anger living in her tissues. The journey wasn't learning to control this anger, but to recognize it as a legitimate response to having her boundaries violated. To welcome it as information rather than condemn it as unspiritual or unladylike. As she developed a new relationship with her anger, honoring it, expressing it cleanly, allowing it to move through her rather than become her identity, the physical symptoms began to resolve. Jung wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." This is the essence of emotional intelligence, not transcending our emotions, but developing a wiser relationship with all of them. The fifth truth: freedom comes from integration, not escape. There's a persistent myth in our culture that healing means reaching a state where you no longer feel pain, where triggers disappear, where the past no longer affects you. Jung knew better. He understood that wholeness isn't the absence of suffering, but the integration of all parts of ourselves, the light and the shadow, the wounded child and the resilient adult, the vulnerable heart and the protective armor. James grew up with an alcoholic mother. As a child, he developed hypervigilance, always scanning for danger, always ready for the unpredictable storm. This survival mechanism served him well in childhood. It kept him safe. It helped him navigate chaos. But at 40, this same hypervigilance was destroying his relationships. He could never relax, never trust, never surrender to intimacy. When he entered therapy, he hoped to get rid of his anxiety, to finally be fixed. What he discovered instead was far more powerful. He learned to recognize his hypervigilance not as a defect, but as an intelligent adaptation that had served a purpose. Rather than fighting it, he befriended it. He would say, "I see you're scanning for danger right now. Thank you for trying to protect me. We're safe here." Over time, something remarkable happened. The very pattern that had been his prison became a source of wisdom. His sensitivity to subtle shifts in emotional weather made him extraordinarily perceptive. His ability to anticipate problems before they arose made him an exceptional leader. Jung called this process individuation, the lifelong journey of integrating the disparate parts of ourselves into a coherent, authentic whole, not by eliminating our wounds, but by understanding the gifts hidden within them. "I am not what happened to me," Jung wrote. "I am what I choose to become." This is perhaps his most revolutionary insight. We are neither defined by our trauma nor capable of erasing it. Instead, we are defined by how we relate to our experiences, how we metabolize them, make meaning from them, and ultimately, how we allow them to inform rather than dictate our future. Here's the truth that few have the courage to face. Pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. Let me say that again, because it's worth pausing on. Pain is inevitable. It comes with having a body, a heart, and relationships in an impermanent world. But suffering, the story we wrap around pain, the resistance to what is, the belief that pain should not be happening, that's where the true anguish lies. When Jung said, "Nothing and nobody will ever hurt you again," he wasn't promising a life free from pain. He was revealing a radical shift in perspective that changes your relationship with pain forever. Imagine standing in an ocean as waves crash against you. If you tense and resist, each wave feels like an assault. But if you learn to move with the water, to surrender to its rhythm without abandoning yourself, those same waves become a dance. The pain doesn't disappear. The waves don't stop coming, but you stop experiencing them as enemies. This is the secret that mystics, philosophers, and depth psychologists have been pointing to for centuries. The liberation comes not from escaping your humanity, but from fully embracing it. Vulnerability, uncertainty, impermanence, and all. As Jung wrote in one of his most profound insights, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, in order to avoid facing their own soul." One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The darkness he speaks of isn't something to transcend. It's something to illuminate, to explore with curiosity rather than judgment. Because it's precisely in those shadowed places, the grief we've never fully expressed, the rage we've deemed unacceptable, the vulnerability we've tried to outrun, that our most authentic self awaits discovery. So how do we begin this journey of pain transformation? Not by seeking pain, we don't need to, but by changing how we meet the inevitable suffering that life brings. First, consider developing a practice of witnessing rather than identifying. When pain arrives, notice the instinct to say, "I am heartbroken," or "I am anxious." Try instead, "I notice heartbreak moving through me," or "I'm experiencing anxiety right now." This subtle shift creates space between you and the emotion, not to disconnect, but to relate more consciously. Second, ask yourself, what might this pain be trying to teach me? Not to intellectualize or spiritually bypass, but to honor pain as a messenger rather than an enemy. Sometimes the message is simply that you're human and connection matters. Sometimes it's pointing to deeper patterns that need attention. Third, remember that integration happens in community. Jung understood that our wounds heal differently when witnessed by compassionate others. This doesn't mean everyone deserves access to your vulnerable places. Discernment is crucial, but isolation often intensifies suffering. Find those who can sit with your pain without trying to fix it or make it more comfortable for themselves. Finally, practice what Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron calls staying with the uncomfortable feeling. When discomfort arises, notice the impulse to reach for distraction, numbing, or control. See if you can stay present for just 5 more breaths, then 5 more. This gradually builds your capacity to be with the full spectrum of human emotion. The journey Jung invites us into isn't about becoming superhuman or transcending our vulnerability. It's about becoming fully human, embracing both our fragility and our resilience, our wounds and our wisdom. When he said, "Nothing and nobody will ever hurt you again," he was pointing to a freedom that exists not outside of pain, but right in the heart of it, a freedom born not of escape, but of radical acceptance and integration. What wounds are you still running from? What pain are you still resisting? What emotions have you deemed too dangerous to feel? Perhaps like Jung discovered in his darkest night, these are precisely the doorways to your most authentic self. In our next exploration, we'll dive into another of Jung's revolutionary insights. Why the person you find most irritating might be your greatest teacher. It's a journey into what he called the golden shadow, and it might forever change how you see the people who challenge you most. Until then, remember, the cracks in your heart are how the light gets in.